In the autumn of 1987, demolition crews tearing down the abandoned Whitmore homestead in rural Tennessee made a discovery that would haunt the county coroner for decades. Beneath rotting floorboards in what appeared to be a child's bedroom, they found a collection of items that defied explanation. 13 handmade wedding rings, each one smaller than the last, alongside a leather-bound ledger documenting unions that should never have been recorded. The final entry, dated 1943, was written in a child's trembling handwriting. Papa says I'm ready now. Mama cries, but doesn't stop him. Before we dive into this forbidden history, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which state you're watching from. Your support helps us uncover these buried truths. The first official record of the Whitmore family appears in the 1890 federal census for Bledsoe County, Tennessee. Census enumerator Jacob Mills noted the household with unusual detail, his handwriting growing increasingly erratic as he documented what he found on that isolated ridge. Ezekiel Whitmore, age 34, head of household. Sarah Whitmore, age 16, listed as wife. But it was the notation in the margins that Mills would later confess kept him awake at night. Wife appears to be daughter. Confronted head of household. Threatened with rifle. Recorded as instructed. Mills' personal journal, discovered in his descendant's attic in 1978, revealed the full horror of that September day. He described approaching the Whitmore cabin through thick woods, noting the unnatural silence that seemed to press against his ears. No birds sang near that place, he wrote. Even the insects seemed to avoid it. The cabin itself was wrong somehow, built with windows that faced inward toward the center of the house rather than out toward the valley, as if the inhabitants wanted to see who was coming up from the cellar rather than own from the mountain. When Ezekiel Whitmore answered the door, Mills immediately noticed the family resemblance between the man and the pregnant girl cowering behind him. Same narrow-set eyes, same weak chin, same strawberry birthmark along the jawline, Mills documented. When I asked her age, the man answered for her. When I asked her name, he said, Mrs. Whitmore, in a tone that brooked no argument, but she whispered it when he turned away. Sarah Whitmore. Born Sarah Whitmore. The census taker's most disturbing observation came when he glimpsed the interior of the cabin. Saw 3 children playing in the corner, he wrote. 2 appeared normal, but the third, Lord forgive me, the third child had eyes that didn't track together and hands that bent backward at the wrist. When it smiled at me, I counted too many teeth. Mills completed the census as directed, but his conscience wouldn't let him rest. 3 months later, he returned to the ridge with Sheriff Coleman Hayes, only to find the cabin abandoned. Looked like they'd left in a hurry, Hayes noted in his official report. Food still on the table, clothes still in the drawers, but every mirror in the house had been smashed, and someone had carved symbols into the bedroom walls, symbols I didn't recognize and didn't want to. The Whitmore family's trail might have gone cold if not for the meticulous record-keeping of Father Michael O'Brien at St. Catherine's Church in nearby Pikeville. O'Brien, an Irish immigrant priest with a reputation for moral inflexibility, kept detailed notes on every family in his sprawling rural parish. His leather-bound registry, preserved in the church basement for over a century, contained entries that painted a picture of a family trapped in an endless, horrifying cycle. The first Whitmore marriage recorded by Father O'Brien took place on November 3rd, 1891. Ezekiel Whitmore, age 35, to Martha Whitmore, age 15, the entry read. But O'Brien's private notes, written in Latin to obscure their content from prying eyes, told a different story entirely. Translated, they revealed, the girl wept throughout the ceremony. When asked if she took this man as her husband, she looked to an older woman in the pews, clearly her mother, who nodded firmly. The girl's answer was barely audible. I fear I have blessed a union that God would condemn. Martha Whitmore died in childbirth 8 months later, but not before giving birth to twins, Sarah and Samuel. Father O'Brien's notes from the baptism are even more disturbing. The infants share certain deformities that suggest ungodly parentage. The girl child has 6 fingers on her left hand. The boy's left leg is withered and turns inward. I baptized them in the name of Christ, but I fear their souls were claimed long before they drew breath. Ezekiel wasted no time in finding a replacement wife. 6 months after Martha's death, he appeared at the church with another young woman. This time his own cousin, Rebecca Whitmore, age 14. Father O'Brien's entry for this ceremony is brief but telling. I refused to perform this union. Told the man to seek blessing elsewhere. He informed me that there was nowhere else. That the ridge must be kept in the family. When I continued to refuse, he produced a document bearing the signature of Bishop Matthews. I have no choice but to comply, though my soul rebels against it. Rebecca lasted 3 years, bearing 4 children before disappearing entirely from the records. Father O'Brien noted her absence grimly. Mrs. Rebecca Whitmore has not been seen at services for 2 months. When questioned, her husband claims she has gone to visit family in Kentucky. I have written to every parish in that state. No one has seen her. I fear the worst, but I have no proof, and the law seems reluctant to venture up the ridge. But it was Father O'Brien's final entry regarding the Whitmore family that would prove most prophetic. Written in 1894, after Ezekiel appeared at the church with his 14-year-old daughter Sarah, the priest's anguish is palpable even across the centuries. I can no longer remain silent. I have written to the authorities, though I doubt they will act. This man means to wed his own child, and he has produced documentation that suggests this practice has been encouraged by certain members of the church hierarchy. God forgive us all, but I believe we have allowed something unholy to take root on that ridge, and I fear it will spread like a cancer through these mountains. Father O'Brien's letter to the authorities did eventually reach the right hands, though it took 3 years and the intervention of a persistent social reformer named Eleanor Blackwood. Blackwood, a member of the Tennessee Child Welfare Society, had been investigating reports of child marriages throughout the Appalachian region when she came across O'Brien's correspondence in the state archives. In 1897, she convinced state authorities to send Inspector Thomas Carnahan to investigate the Whitmore family. Carnahan, a former military man with experience in documenting atrocities during the Indian Wars, was chosen specifically because of his ability to maintain objectivity in disturbing situations. His subsequent report, filed with the Tennessee Department of Health and sealed for nearly 90 years, paints a picture of systematic abuse that defied contemporary understanding of human behavior. Carnahan arrived at the Whitmore cabin on a cold February morning, accompanied by a deputy sheriff and a court stenographer. His initial observations were clinical but unsettling. The dwelling appears to have been expanded multiple times without regard for architectural logic. Rooms connect to other rooms with no central hallway. Several chambers appear to have no windows at all. The smell throughout the structure is indescribable, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. Inside the cabin, Carnahan found Ezekiel Whitmore, now 41, living with what he claimed were his wife Sarah, age 19, and their 4 children, ranging in age from 2 to 5. But Carnahan's trained eye immediately detected inconsistencies in the family's story. The woman called Sarah bears no resemblance to a 19-year-old, he wrote. Her face shows the weathering of someone much older, and her body the damage of multiple difficult births. When questioned separately, she initially claimed to be 19, then 17, then finally admitted she didn't know her own age because Papa never told me when I was born. The children presented an even more disturbing picture. Carnahan's medical examination revealed that all 4 showed signs of genetic abnormalities consistent with close inbreeding. The eldest boy, called Isaac, has a cleft palate so severe that his speech is largely unintelligible. The second child, a girl named Ruth, appears to be deaf in one ear and has a withered left arm. The youngest 2 are twins who share several troubling characteristics. Both have eyes of different colors, and both display intellectual deficiencies that make communication difficult. But it was Carnahan's discovery in the cabin's cellar, that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Beneath the kitchen floorboards, accessed by a hidden trapdoor, I found a chamber that appeared to serve as both a root cellar and something far more sinister. The walls were lined with shelves containing preserved specimens in glass jars, malformed fetuses, extra limbs, organs of unclear origin. At the center of the room stood a wooden table stained dark with what I can only assume was blood. Carved into the table's surface were names and dates going back decades, along with symbols that I recognized from my time studying occult practices among certain Native American tribes. Carnahan's investigation was cut short when Ezekiel Whitmore produced a writ of protection signed by a state judge, a document that would later be revealed as a forgery, but one convincing enough to force the inspector's withdrawal. His final notes before leaving the ridge were prophetic. I am convinced that what I witnessed represents only the visible portion of a practice that has been occurring for generations. The family's isolation, the apparent collaboration of certain religious and legal authorities, and the systematic nature of the abuse suggests an organized effort to preserve something that should have been allowed to die out long ago. I fear we have stumbled upon a breeding program designed to produce specific traits, though for what purpose, I cannot fathom. Inspector Carnahan's report disappeared from state files within 6 months of its submission, but copies had been made and distributed to various medical professionals throughout Tennessee. One of these copies found its way to Dr. Elias Moorcock, a physician and amateur anthropologist who had been studying genetic disorders among isolated mountain communities. Dr. Moorcock's subsequent investigation into the Whitmore family uncovered medical records spanning 3 generations, many of which had been deliberately misfiled or hidden in the archives of rural hospitals and clinics. What he found painted a picture of systematic genetic manipulation that predated modern understanding of heredity by decades. The earliest medical record Dr. Moorcock uncovered dated to 1878 and concerned the original Ezekiel's father, Josiah Whitmore. According to the notes of Dr. Franklin Pierce, no relation to the president, who practiced medicine in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, Josiah had sought treatment for his wife's melancholia following the birth of their 3rd child. Mrs. Whitmore exhibits signs of severe mental distress, Dr. Pierce wrote. She claims her husband has been experimenting on the family bloodline, forcing unions between relatives to strengthen certain gifts. She speaks of children born with extra fingers, exceptional night vision, and the ability to hear thoughts. I have dismissed these claims as the ravings of a disturbed mind, but the physical evidence of the children suggests unusual genetic patterns. Dr. Pierce's notes grew increasingly disturbed as he continued treating the Whitmore family. In 1880, he documented the birth of a child he described as barely human, born with what appeared to be gills along its neck and fingers webbed to the 2nd knuckle. The infant died within hours, but not before Dr. Pierce made detailed anatomical drawings that he kept in a private collection separate from his official files. I am beginning to suspect that Mr. Whitmore's claims about strengthening the bloodline may have some basis in fact, Dr. Pierce wrote after examining the child's remains. The deformities are not random. They appear to follow specific patterns, as if someone were deliberately selecting for certain traits. But what those traits might be, and why someone would want to enhance them, I cannot imagine. Dr. Moorcock's research revealed that similar records existed for hospitals throughout the region, all documenting unusual births among the Whitmore family and their close relatives. A pattern emerged. Every generation produced children with increasingly severe deformities, but also with certain enhanced capabilities. Several medical reports mentioned children with exceptional night vision, others with extraordinary hearing, and still others with an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns days in advance. The most disturbing file Dr. Moorcock uncovered came from the Tennessee State Asylum for the Insane, where 2 Whitmore women had been committed in the 1890s. The case notes described both women as suffering from hereditary madness, but their recorded statements suggested something far more sinister. They speak of the breeding as if it were a sacred duty, the asylum doctor wrote. Both claim their family has been chosen to preserve something ancient, something that must not be allowed to die out. They describe rituals performed during childbirth, specific prayers said over newborns, and detailed records kept of which children display the gifts and which are deemed failures. One of the women, identified only as Mrs. E. Whitmore, provided the asylum staff with detailed drawings of what she called the true family tree. The drawings, preserved in the asylum's archives, showed not a traditional genealogical chart, but something more resembling a breeding diagram, with lines connecting specific individuals based on their genetic traits rather than their relationships. At the center of the diagram was a symbol that Dr. Moorcock recognized from his anthropological studies, an ancient Celtic symbol associated with transformation and rebirth. Dr. Moorcock's investigation took a chilling turn in 1923 when he was contacted by a retired photographer named Augustus Finch. Finch had worked throughout rural Tennessee in the early 1900s, documenting mountain families for various government and academic studies. Among his personal collection were photographs he had never been able to publish, images of the Whitmore family that he claimed were too disturbing for public consumption. The photographs, taken during a 1903 visit to the Whitmore Ridge, showed the family posed outside their cabin in what appeared to be a formal portrait session. But closer examination revealed details that explained Finch's reluctance to make them public. The family group includes what appear to be 4 generations, Dr. Moorcock noted in his analysis. But the relationships between the individuals are unclear. Several of the women appear to be both mothers and daughters to other members of the group. The children display varying degrees of deformity, but all share certain characteristics: pale eyes, unusually long fingers, and facial features that suggest limited genetic diversity. One photograph in particular caught Dr. Moorcock's attention. It showed the interior of the Whitmore cabin, specifically what appeared to be a ceremony of some kind. A young woman, barely into her teens, stood before an older man while several other family members watched. The woman wore a white dress, but her expression was one of terror rather than joy. Most disturbing was a detail in the background. The walls of the cabin were covered with what appeared to be family portraits, but the faces in the portraits had been deliberately obscured with dark paint, leaving only the eyes visible. Finch's accompanying notes provided context that made the images even more disturbing. The family agreed to the portrait session only after I promised not to include their faces in any published work, he wrote. They seemed particularly concerned about outsiders recognizing certain family members. During my time on the ridge, I observed what I can only describe as a wedding ceremony between a man of perhaps 40 and a girl who could not have been more than 14. When I expressed shock, the family patriarch, Ezekiel Whitmore, explained that they were preserving sacred bloodlines and that outsiders wouldn't understand their higher purpose. The photographer's most chilling observation came at the end of his visit. As I prepared to leave, the young bride approached me privately, Finch recorded. She pressed a piece of paper into my hand and begged me to send it to the authorities. The note, written in a childish hand, read, "They say the blood must stay pure, but the babies come out wrong. Please help us." I kept the note for years, but when I finally worked up the courage to contact the sheriff, I was told the Whitmore family had moved away and that the case was closed. Dr. Moorcock's attempts to verify Finch's story led him to the Bledsoe County Sheriff's Department, where he discovered that records from 1903 had been mysteriously purged from the files. However, he did find a single document that had been misfiled under a different name. Deputy Sheriff William Cravens's report of a disturbance on the Whitmore Ridge that same year received complaint of gunfire and screaming from the Whitmore place, Cravens wrote. Arrived to find family in middle of some kind of ceremony. Young girl appeared distressed. When questioned, family claimed to be celebrating a wedding. Girl appeared too young to be married, but patriarch produced marriage license signed by Justice McKnight. Left without incident, but something didn't sit right. Returned next day to find girl had taken ill and was unable to speak to visitors. Family claimed she had damaged her throat screaming during childbirth complications, though she showed no signs of recent pregnancy. The Whitmore family might have faded into historical obscurity if not for an unlikely intersection with federal law enforcement in 1943. During the height of World War II, the FBI was investigating reports of draft dodgers hiding in the Appalachian Mountains when Agent Robert Kellerman stumbled upon evidence of what he initially believed to be a deserter hideout on the ridge where the Whitmore cabin had once stood. Kellerman's classified report, declassified under the Freedom of Information Act in 1995, revealed that the Whitmore family had not simply disappeared as local authorities claimed. Instead, they had constructed an elaborate underground complex beneath their original cabin, complete with living quarters, food storage, and what Kellerman described as laboratories equipped with medical instruments and detailed genetic charts. The underground facility appears to have been in continuous use for decades, Kellerman wrote. The main chamber contains living quarters for approximately 20 individuals, though we found evidence that as many as 35 people had been residing there recently. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed records documenting genetic experiments spanning 4 generations. The records suggest that the family had been deliberately breeding for specific traits, with particular emphasis on what they termed enhanced sensory capabilities and psychic gifts. Kellerman's investigation revealed that the Whitmore family had established contact with Nazi eugenics researchers in the 1930s, exchanging detailed breeding records and genetic data. We discovered correspondence between family patriarch Ezekiel Whitmore Jr. and Dr. Hans Mueller, a geneticist affiliated with the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, the FBI report stated. The letters discuss the possibility of accelerating the breeding program through the introduction of etched, scientifically selected genetic material from European subjects. The most chilling discovery in the underground complex was what Kellerman termed the nursery, a series of chambers designed to house newborn infants under controlled conditions. Each chamber contains detailed monitoring equipment and charts tracking infant development, he wrote. The walls are covered with photographs of children displaying various deformities and abnormalities, with notations indicating which traits were considered successful and which were deemed failures. Most disturbing was the discovery of a crematorium in an adjacent chamber, suggesting that failed specimens were disposed of immediately. Kellerman's raid on the complex resulted in the arrest of 12 family members ranging in age from 16 to 67. However, the FBI agent's subsequent reports indicate that the investigation was mysteriously terminated within weeks of its initiation. Received orders from Washington to cease all activities related to the Whitmore case, Kellerman wrote in his final report. All evidence has been confiscated by parties unknown. Family members have been released and relocated to undisclosed locations. When questioned about the order, my superiors claimed the investigation was interfering with sensitive wartime operations and that the matter was now under the jurisdiction of other agencies. The abrupt termination of the FBI investigation sparked decades of speculation about government cover-ups and secret experiments. Dr. Moorcock, who had been consulting with Agent Kellerman, found his own research suddenly restricted when federal agents confiscated his files and threatened him with prosecution if he continued his investigation. They made it clear that certain knowledge was not meant for public consumption, he wrote in his private journal. I was told that the Whitmore family's research had produced results that were now considered matters of national security. Despite the government's attempts to bury the Whitmore story, fragments of information continued to surface over the following decades. In 1987, the demolition of the original Whitmore cabin finally revealed the physical evidence that had been hidden for nearly a century. But the most disturbing revelations came from an unexpected source, an elderly woman named Mary Whitmore Hancock, who came forward after reading about the demolition in local newspapers. Mary claimed to be the last surviving member of the Whitmore family, the daughter of Sarah Whitmore and granddaughter of the original Ezekiel. Her testimony, given to local historian Dr. Patricia Vance, painted a picture of systematic abuse and genetic manipulation that continued well into the 1950s. My mother never spoke about her childhood, Mary told Dr. Vance. But when she was dying, the morphine loosened her tongue. She told me things that I never wanted to hear, about the breeding program, about the babies that were born wrong and disappeared, about the experiments they performed to try to strengthen the blood. She said our family had been chosen for something, but that something had gotten twisted along the way. Mary's account revealed that the underground complex discovered by Agent Kellerman had been only one of several such facilities constructed by the Whitmore family over the decades. They had places all through these mountains, she said, caves and tunnels connecting different sites, always staying ahead of the authorities. My mother said there were other families involved too. The Crenshaws, the Bellows, the Mackenzies. They all shared the same purpose. According to Mary, the breeding program had indeed produced individuals with enhanced capabilities, but at a terrible cost. Some of my cousins could see in complete darkness, she revealed. Others could hear conversations from miles away. One could predict earthquakes days before they happened. But for every child born with gifts, 3 or 4 came out so deformed they couldn't survive. The family kept detailed records of which combinations produced which results, like they were breeding livestock instead of human beings. Mary's most disturbing revelation concerned the ultimate goal of the breeding program. My mother said they were trying to bring back something ancient, she explained. Something that had existed before normal humans. Something with powers that had been bred out of the general population. They believed that by concentrating certain bloodlines and eliminating outside influences, they could resurrect these beings. But what they were creating wasn't human anymore. It was something else entirely. The woman's testimony gained credibility when she led investigators to 3 additional sites in the Tennessee mountains where the Whitmore family had operated facilities. At each location, they found evidence of the same systematic breeding program, medical equipment, genetic charts, and burial sites containing the remains of dozens of malformed infants and children. Dr. Vance's subsequent research revealed that similar operations had been conducted by isolated families throughout Appalachia, all apparently connected to the same overarching program. What we're looking at isn't the actions of a single deranged family, she concluded. This appears to have been a coordinated effort involving multiple bloodlines across several states, all working toward the same goal. The question isn't what they were trying to create, it's whether they succeeded. Today, the ridge where the Whitmore cabin once stood remains empty, marked only by a historical plaque that mentions nothing of the horrors that occurred there. Local residents still avoid the area, claiming that strange sounds can be heard on quiet nights. The crying of children who were never allowed to live. The whispered prayers of women who were never allowed to escape. The 13 wedding rings found beneath the floorboards were eventually traced to children as young as 9 years old, each one smaller than the last, each one representing another generation trapped in a cycle of abuse that masqueraded as sacred duty. The leather-bound ledger that accompanied them documented unions spanning nearly 8 decades, a family tree that twisted back on itself so many times it resembled more of a knot than a lineage. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Whitmore story is not what was discovered, but what remains hidden. Government files that are still classified decades after the events they describe. Medical records that have mysteriously vanished from hospital archives. Families throughout Appalachia who refuse to discuss certain relatives, certain bloodlines, certain practices that their grandparents brought down from the mountains. In the summer months, when the Tennessee heat grows oppressive and the mountain air grows still, people living near the old Whitmore Ridge sometimes report strange phenomena. Children born with too many fingers, livestock producing offspring with impossible deformities, and always, the whispered stories of families who kept to themselves, who married within their own bloodlines, who spoke of preserving something ancient and powerful that the outside world was not ready to understand. The breeding program may have ended with Mary Whitmore Hancock's generation, but the genetic legacy of 8 decades of systematic manipulation doesn't simply disappear. In medical clinics throughout the region, doctors still occasionally encounter patients with unusual characteristics, enhanced night vision, extraordinary hearing sensitivity, an uncanny ability to predict natural disasters. Most dismiss these cases as genetic anomalies, random mutations that occur in isolated populations. But sometimes, late at night, when they're alone with their medical journals, these same doctors find themselves wondering about the patients who refuse to provide family histories, who pay in cash and disappear before follow-up appointments, who carry themselves with an otherworldly awareness that suggests they know secrets the rest of us cannot fathom. The ridge has kept its silence for over 30 years now, but in the Tennessee mountains, silence is never permanent. It's simply waiting for the right moment to speak again, to reveal what other horrors lie buried beneath the floorboards of history, what other families carried on the work that the Whitmores began. And somewhere in those mountains, in hidden hollows and forgotten valleys, the descendants of that unholy breeding program may still be walking among us, carrying in their blood the remnants of something that should have died out long ago. The records have been sealed, the witnesses have died, and the evidence has been buried. But the bloodline remains, scattered like seeds across the American landscape, waiting for the right conditions to bloom again into something humanity was never meant to encounter.